and welcome back to the First Flight Kickoff streams. My name is Jess, and today we will be talking you through the First Flight Kickoff, the First Flight number 39, which is called Hawk High. So First Flight's opportunities for you to practice what you've learned over on Updraft and take those skills to the next level. So they are like a mock competition. You can go onto the CodeHawks platform and enter this competition as you would a real competitive audit and learn how to create submissions for competitive audits. Those submissions will be judged by our CodeHawks judges, so you can get real hands-on experience before you delve into those more complex competitions with those more complex repos. So these first flights are more of a gamified competitive audit, allowing you to gain some experience with simplified repos. So this repo has kindly been contributed from a member of our community, and it is called Hawk High. So today we'll be talking through that code base, looking through the different functions, discovering how it works, and then we will leave you for the next 6 days to go through this and find some vulnerabilities and submit them on the CodeHawks platform. Before we get started, let's take a look at the comment section here. Alex asks, how many first flights do you think one should do before participating in a real contest? Now, this is completely up to you. I mean, doing 2 or 3 sounds about right. You don't want to be doing first flights competitions forever. You do want to be moving on into those real competitive audits and earning some money. But they are a great way for you to start to understand different repos and learn how you best work through a competition. And they're a great way for you to learn how to create your own submissions as well. So they are the middle ground really between graduating from Updraft and moving into the competitive audit space. Don't stick on them for too long, but just build your confidence and build your skill set. Learn how to look at different repos, how you learn the structure of different repos, and learn yourself what's best for you during the first flights. And then when you go into the competitions, you'll feel a lot more confident and you'll have more of like a learning structure. You'll know what works for you. Anyway, let's take a look at Hawk High. Let's take a look at the repo and let's get started with today's deep dive. So today's repo is called Hawk High. As I said, this is being contributed by somebody within the community. Let's see what it's all about. So, welcome to Hawk High. Enroll, avoid bad reviews, and graduate. You have been contracted to review the upgradable contracts for the Hawk High School, which will be launched very soon. These contracts utilize the UUPSUpgradeable library from OpenZeppelin. At the end of the school session in 4 weeks, the system is upgraded to a new one. So, we're going to be looking through the different contest details here. We'll be learning more about the different actors. We'll take a look at some of the invariants and we'll take a look at the actual repo itself today as well. Now, as you know here, it does utilize the UUPSUpgradeable library from OpenZeppelin. If you are not familiar with this, then check out Kira's article on the Cypher blog. I will post this in the live chat over on YouTube right now, so you can take a look at this. So this will talk you through the proxy pattern, and towards the bottom of it as well, you will see some information on the UUPS model as well. It's important to be familiar with all of this when you're looking at upgradable contracts, because you will see you need to be aware of the storage slots and lots of different factors that you may not consider if you're not familiar with upgradable patterns. So that's definitely worth checking out if this is your first contract using UUPS upgrades, but you will have the rest of the week to go through that in more detail. I will leave that to you. In today's video, we will be going through the different functions within the contract and their intended functionality, and leave the vulnerability finding up to you guys. Let's take a look at the different actors within the repo before we do get stuck in and take a look at the GitHub. So first of all, we have the principal. So they are in charge of hiring or firing teachers, starting the school session, upgrading the system at the end of the school session as well. They will receive 5% of all school fees paid as their wages, and they can expel students who break the rules. So there's a couple of different features there for the principal role, but we'll see those within the contracts in just a second. Next, we have the teachers. So they're in charge of giving reviews to students at the end of each week, and they will share 35% of all the school fees as their wages. Finally, we have the students. So they will pay a school fee when enrolling in Hawkeye School. They will get a review each week. If they fail to meet the cutoff score at the end of the school session, so at the end of the 4 weeks, they will not graduate to the next level when the principal upgrades the system. So they're the different actors within the repo, but all of that will make a lot more sense when we've taken a look at the repo. So let's get over to GitHub there and see what's going on. All you need to do to get here is go to the CodeHawk platform, click on First Flights, go to Hawkeye, and then you can, well, I was just there. And then you can you? There you go. Then you can click View Repo and it will take you to the GitHub. All of that information we just discussed is within the README here. And you also have instructions on the setup down here. And you can see the compatibilities and the scope. It is good practice to, that'd be helpful. Share the screen. Thank you, Chris. So when you click on, let's go back here. When you go to CodeHawk, so you go to First Flights, you click on Hawkeye, and then you will see the Hawkeye page here. When you click on View Repo, you will get over to GitHub with all of the information. And as I just said, you'll get the setup instructions here, the compatibilities, and the scope as well. It is good practice to always check out the scope when you're looking at the README because the scopes can vary. For the first flights, everything's in scope, but when you move on to competitions, that may be different. So it's definitely worth getting into the practice of taking a look at the scope there. Anyway, let's take a look at the source code here. Let's take a look at the contracts, see what we're looking at and the intended functionality. And then you've got the next 6 days to find vulnerabilities and submit them on the CodeHawk platform. So first of all, we are looking at level 1, the contract level 1, and we've got the usual setup. We've got some contracts imported, specifically some to do with UUPS upgrades. Since I wasn't sharing my screen before, I will share this again. There is a blog post here from Kira at Cypherin that talks you through proxy patterns and UUPS upgrades. So make sure to check that out if you've not checked that out yet. So that will explain a little bit more about the upgrade contracts that are inherited here. And then we've got some ERC20 contracts from OpenZeppelin there as well. So next, moving on here, the author is somebody from our community. So thank you very much for that contribution. If you are watching, if you would like to contribute a repo, then please do so as well. But let's take a look at this contract now. Let's stop getting distracted. Let's take a look at the contract and see what is going on. So first of all, we're making it initializable and UUPS upgradable. And then we've got a couple of different variables. And when I say a couple, I mean a lot. And this is why I say it's important to check the slot storage, the storage slots on the UUPS upgradable blog post made by Kira. I'm not familiar what the vulnerabilities for this repo are, but maybe that could be something hidden in here. So let's take a look at the different variables. We've got the address of the principal. We've got a Boolean that will return true or false if the session has started, if we're in session. Then we've got the value of the school fees. Then we have, let's run through these a little bit quicker. We've got review time, which is 1 week. We've got the session ended, the bursary, the cutoff score. These are all UNT 256. We've then got some mapping. So we'll take an address to determine if they are a teacher, true or false. Then we'll take an address to see if they are a student, true or false. We've got the student score. So we'll take the address of the student and get their score. We've got the review count. So we'll take the address and then we'll get their review. So the number of reviews each student has had. They should be having 4 throughout the week, the 4 weeks. Then we've got the last review time. So we are taking the address and we are returning the time of the student's last review. Next, we have 2 arrays. These are address arrays, and we have an array of the student addresses and an array of the teacher addresses. But moving on to some more variables here, we've got the wages for the different actors within the contracts. We've got the teacher wage, which is 35% of the school fees. Then we've got the principal wage, which is 5% of the school fees. And then we've got precision set to 100. Next, we are initializing USDC. And then we're moving on to the events here. So the events are pretty self-explanatory. They will be emitted throughout this next contract, and the errors are self-explanatory as well. So let's move on past those quickly. Next, we've got some modifiers. So these will limit who can call specific functions. We've got only principal as a modifier, which will, of course, allow only the principal to call that function. Then we've got one for teachers as well, only teacher. And then we have a modifier to check that we are in session. So some functions will only be called if the session is in session is returning true. Moving on then to the initializer. So this will initialize and set up the contracts inherited by this upgradable contract. So you will learn more about this within the blog post that Kira has written, but this is essentially in place of the constructor when we are using the UUPS upgradable model. So this does a couple of things. First of all, it takes two addresses as the parameter and the school fees there as well. So we're going to make sure that the two addresses are not the 0 address. One of them is the principal's address and one of them is the USDC address. And then we have the school fees value as well. So we're making sure that's not equal to 0. And then we're all set to go. We're all ready to get started. We'll make all of those checks with these if functions here. And then we will assign the values to our variables defined higher up in the contract. And then we can get started. So let's take a look then at the first external function here. We've got enroll as a function. It is an external function and it does use the modifier not yet in session. So if the session in session is returning false, this function cannot be called. When we do call this function no and in session returns true, we can make a few checks before we enroll users. So if the function caller is the teacher, this will return false. And if they are the principal, this will return false, meaning that the teacher and the principals cannot enroll to Hawk High. Next, if they are already a student, the caller of this function is already a student, this will revert as well. So we're making sure that they're not a teacher, they're not a principal, and they're not already a student. If all of those things are true, then we can start to make the transfer and start enrolling the function caller to make them a student. So they are obviously going to pay to take part here. They're going to do a transfer from the function caller to this contract for the value of the school fees. Then we need to basically initialize this function caller as a student. So we need to update all of the variables. We need to add the function caller to the list of students array. We need to change is student with the caller's address to true. We need to set the student score to 100 in that mapping. And we need to add the fee paid by this student to the bursary variable. So we've got the full value there. Finally, we want to emit the event saying this student has enrolled. So there is the enroll function. We then have a couple of view functions to take a look at. Again, all self-explanatory. We've got get principal, get school fees cost. I don't need to read all of these out. These will just return what they're trying to get. So you can take a look through those. Next, we have the public functions. So we are looking at first the add teacher. As you can imagine, this is to add a teacher into the cohort. So it will take the address of the teacher. This can only be called by the principal using that only principal mapping that we discussed earlier and using the not yet in session mapping modifier we discussed earlier as well. So the session needs to have started and it needs to be the principal calling the function. If both of those are true, then we can get started here. We're going to run through a couple of if functions here. So we are going to check that the teacher address that has been inputted as the parameter is not the 0 address. We are then going to make sure that the address is not already a teacher within this cohort. And we are going to check that the teacher is not a student's address because that wouldn't work out. So once we've checked all of these things, we can start to create this teacher within this cohort. So we will add the teacher's address to the list of teachers array, and we will set the mapping of isTeacher with the teacher's address to true. Finally, we will emit the teacher added event with the teacher's address in there. Now, again, this is going to be pretty self-explanatory. We're moving on to the remove teacher function. This is going to take a teacher's address as well. This can only be called by the principal. We're going to make sure that the teacher's address parameter inputted is not 0. And we're going to make sure that the address inputted does correspond to somebody who's already a teacher, because we can't remove somebody as a teacher if they're not already a teacher. So that's what this checks here. Next, we are going to take a variable called teacher length, and we are going to get list of teachers length. We're going to run through the array of the list of teachers, and then we are going to remove this particular teacher from that array. So all of this block, all that does is make sure that when we look at the list of teachers, the list of teachers mapping, it's one less, and we've taken this teacher out. And then we are going to change the mapping, the array there. Then we're going to take the mapping, and we are going to take the teacher's address and return false, because they have been removed from this school. Then we are going to emit teacher removed, and that is an event that will be emitted that was defined earlier. Next, we are moving on to the next function here, which is expel. Now, as we discussed in the about section for this repo, only the principal can call this. We have made sure of that with the only principal modifier. This takes a parameter of an address, which relates to a student. So this function allows the principal to expel one of the students. There are a couple of checks that need to be done prior to going through the variables. That is to make sure that we are in session. It's to make sure that the student address that's being passed to this function is not the 0 address, and to make sure that that address corresponds to a student within this cohort. Once we've done all of those checks, we can begin removing the student from the list of students array. This involves looping through the array, finding the position of the student within the list of students variable, and then removing them from that list. Next, we are going to make sure the mapping for a student with this address returns false, and then we can emit the expelled event there finally at the end. Next, we have the start session function. So this takes a Unit 256, the cut-off score. This is a public function, but it is limited to just the principal, and we have to make sure that we are in session using this modifier before we can call this function. So what this is going to do is create a session end of in 4 weeks' time. We are going to change the in-session variable to true, and we are going to set the cutoff score to the current cutoff score, which is put into the parameter here. So we can determine what we want that cutoff score to be each time. Then we are going to emit another event, a school in session event with the current timestamp and the end of session timestamp there as well. Next, we have the give review functions. This takes 2 parameters, an address of the student and a Boolean with the review. So this can only be called by the teacher using the only teacher modifier. We have a couple of checks that need to be done here. So we are checking that the student address passed through this function does correspond to a student in this cohort by checking the is student mapping. If they are not, it will revert, but if they are, we can move on to the next require statements. So we are requiring that the review count for the student is less than 5. So this checks how many times each student has had a review. So if a student has been reviewed more than 5 times, then 5 times or more, actually, their review count has been exceeded, and that will revert. And we have a require function here that makes sure that the current timestamp is more than the last review timestamp for the student. and the amount of review time. So reviews can only happen once per week. This review time is worth 1 week. And then the last review timestamp for the student, this is a mapping to show when the last review happened. So if a week plus if the last review time plus 1 week is smaller than the block timestamp currently, it means a week hasn't passed since the last review and we need to revert. So this is what that require statement is checking here. Next, we have an if statement. So where false is a bad review and true is a good review, we're looking if the review, so the Boolean that's passed into this parameter, is false, is not false, then the student score, no, if it is false, then the student score for the student loses 10 points. If it's true, then it doesn't lose 10 points. So update the last review time. We are going to update this mapping so that when we next check this require function, it works correctly. And then we are going to omit the review given event with a couple of variables in there. Next, we are moving on to the graduate and upgrade function. So this takes an address and bytes. So we are going to limit this to only the principal using the modifier. And then we are going to check that the address of level 2, which is the next contract we'll be looking at that's in scope, we're going to check the address for that is not the 0 address. And once confirmed, we can start moving things over. So we can take a look at the total teachers. So we'll take a look at the length of the list of teachers array for this variable. We'll then start to pay our teachers here. So we're looking at pay per teacher. We're taking basically the value of the current contract, all of the fees that have been paid by students. And we are going to multiply that by the teacher wage, which was a variable defined in our variables up here. So teachers should be paid 35%. We're going to take the contract's value, times it by the 35% over precision, which was 100. We'll get the pay per teacher. We'll do the same for the principal and we'll get the principal pay. We'll then authorize the upgrades to contract level 2, and we'll start to make those transfers to the teacher, to each teacher and to the principal as well through safe transfer of USDC. Once we have done those, we can look at the final function, which is authorize upgrade. So this is to the new implementation. This is, again, something you can learn about in Kira's blog post here about upgradable smart contracts. Do check that out if you are unfamiliar with UUPS. It is really important for this repo. And it's good for you to get involved in understanding upgradable contracts before moving into the competitive audit space, although I think they're covered briefly in the Updraft course as well. Next, we can take a look at the contract that we are upgrading to. So we are, again, importing some UPS contracts here. And then we've just got a bunch of view functions within this contract. But there is the graduate function there as well. So we're taking a ton of the same variables from the previous contract, making sure those storage slots are all taken in the same way. And then we've got some function, the function graduate, and then we've got a load of view functions here as well. So nothing too complicated there. Essentially, all of the functionality happens in the level 1 contract, but you do need to be familiar with the UPS upgrades and look at the upgrade from level 1 to level 2. So that is the full run through of the functions within the contracts there. As I said, these first bites are a brilliant opportunity for you to practice creating submissions for competitive audits. All you need to do is go to CodeHawks, click on First Flights, choose Hawk High, and then you can click on Submit Your Vulnerability, begin filling out this doc here, and once you are ready, you submit, and then you can wait a couple of weeks and hear back from the judge. So your submission may get validated, it may get invalidated, and you'll see what severity it was, looking at the impact and looking at the likelihood. So it's real hands-on experience before you jump into the competitive audit space, allowing you to just look at repos that, 200, 300 lines and understand them before moving on to competitions where you're looking at sometimes thousands of lines of code. So a brilliant place to start, and definitely a bridge between Updraft and competitive audits. But I think that's all we need to discuss today. So thank you very much for tuning in. As always, I hope you have enjoyed. If you have any questions about Hawkeye or any of the competitions we have on CodeHawks, make sure to go to the Discord, which is linked in today's video description. Once you've taken a look at the repo, if you have any questions, have a conversation in the Discord. There will be others who are just starting on their first flight, and there will be others who have done multiple first flights or multiple competitive audits. So it's great. It's a great space for you to ask questions and learn from each other. But that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye.